Welcome back, Night Owls. This is Dr. Nighttime, and tonight I'm going to be giving my best advice for students who are studying to take the LTAM exam, or plan to take the LTAM exam within the next year. So, first thing is, suppose, for those of you who are not taking a college course, or not taking college courses to learn LTAM in a formal academic setting, first question you'll want to ask is, how long should you spend preparing? I would recommend 3 months for what I call the info load, the information load. That's where you're reading through the textbooks on it, reading through the study notes, and learning the material for the first time. You could maybe do it a little more quickly. I think when I first was studying for MLC, I think I only studied for it for like 7.5 weeks or so. That's part of the reason why I failed it the first time. But yeah, I would recommend giving yourself a solid 3 months just for the info load, and then 1 month for a polish. Polish is when you've already given everything a read through, but now you're going over fixing gaps in your understanding, being able to tackle some more detailed, nuanced problems, because if you've been looking at prior exams, the written answer questions, which are the harder questions, they really go into the finer details of the concepts. The way I like to view it, by the way, multiple choice versus written answer, the multiple choice aren't really like the exam questions. They're more qualifier questions for whether or not you're allowed to take the exam. That's why if you don't get at least 12 out of those 20 right, they don't even look at the written answer. You didn't qualify to take the exam, essentially. That the real exam is the 56 points on the written answer section. That's how I like to view it. Anyway, so spend 3 months on your info load and 1 month on your polish. Then make sure that you find, wherever you're getting your information from, make sure it matches your style. I know the official textbooks will explain things one way. A lot of the advice out there, I've heard people talk about Coaching Actuaries, Infinite Actuary, ASM Manual. Those have their own educational styles. You'll want to find out which ones really suit you. Some of them are really more explaining logic behind stuff. Others very much don't and say, try to remember these equations. Now, I highly, highly recommend understanding the logic behind the equations, especially on LTAM, where they ask the particularly detailed written answer questions. Then, find appropriate practice questions. What constitutes appropriate practice questions? They should be of the appropriate level of difficulty. So this means for the multiple choice questions, stuff that can be answered in about 5 minutes. They should be of the appropriate intensity, right? They should be of the appropriate scope and of the appropriate focus. So as a counterexample, the questions in the actuarial models for life contingent risks, that official text, they love asking about select life tables. The LTAM hardly ever asks that. Well, maybe not hardly ever, but for the most part asks about ultimate life tables, not select tables. Also, the questions in that textbook are far more detailed. You have to do way more calculation than you would need to for the multiple choice questions. For written answer questions, where they're going to ask you something long, they break it down into small bite-sized pieces. Make sure that your practice questions do that. Then, also, you should make a formula sheet. That's really good for organizing your thoughts. But then, don't just commit the formulas to memory. Try to explain every formula on the sheet. And lastly, during your initial info load, you should focus mostly on the multiple choice questions rather than the more detailed, more difficult written answer questions. Because you're looking at it for the first time. Just get the basics down. You've got an entire month afterward to actually get yourself up to speed. And don't worry about speaking up to speed. You don't have to, during your 3-month info load, you don't have to be answering them in 5 minutes each. If it's taking you 7-8 minutes, That's okay during your info load. You want to get that time down during your polish. During the 1 month polish, now is where you focus more on the written answer problems. As I mentioned, the multiple choice is more like just the qualifiers to be able to take the exam. If you have any chance of passing, the variation in your individual performance from one practice test to another, that's mostly going to come from variation on the written answer questions. Think about it this way. Typically, suppose you're typically averaging like 14, 15 multiple choice correct. Well, those aren't even independent, they're independent but not identically distributed. You've got, typically the first 10 are easier, last 10 are harder, so your scores are more consistently going to bunch up around that 14, 15. So it's unusual for your score to deviate by more than about 2 questions from one test to the next. Whereas, and 2 questions are 4 points, whereas just whether or not you understand or don't understand what to do on just one of the 6 written answer questions that are typically worth 9 or 10 points, that on its own will more than double the uncertainty from, the expected uncertainty from the multiple choice. Yeah. So next, it's less of a priority during your 1 month polish to explain every formula on your formula sheet. Why is that? Well, if you feel like you can memorize the content, the formulas during your info load, you're memorizing them 1 chapter at a time. It's a lot easier to memorize a little bit each time and then forget it when you're studying the next chapter. And being able to explain the formulas helps you remember them. So the memorization might appear to be good enough and then not be. Whereas, if you find that you really can commit stuff to memory during your 1 month polish, that's when you don't worry quite so much about whether you can explain every detail. Next, a good benchmark score during your polish as you're practicing is, I would target a 30-34. 30 points on multiple choice, 34 on written answer. That is assuming a pass mark of approximately 64, which people seem to say that's a little high for a pass mark, but again, that's a good benchmark score. You obviously want to be averaging better than that, but that's your target range of kind of, if you want to talk about, whether you're into the green, right, and in the clear, those are the benchmarks that I would recommend. And lastly, self-grade, and especially on the written answers, keep track of what I call the performance to confidence ratio. If you answer the question, typically if you answered the question and you don't think you answered it right, you probably didn't. But if you think you answered something right, check to see approximately what fraction of the points you'd actually get. For me, I found that was consistently between 80% and 90%. So if I think I answered the question right, I probably got between 80% and 90% of the points. And that helps you just pace yourself for knowing, all right, worst case on the exam itself, are you in the good position or not? Now, if you are taking a college course, there are some obvious benefits to taking a college course. First of all, you have an instructor to guide you. Second of all, it's obviously, all things being equal, better to receive college credit than to not receive college credit. But there's one major downside. Given that the exam is offered at the end of April and end of October, there's no convenient time for your 1 month polish. I mean, the best you could do if you're taking a summer course that ends in August, then you have 2 months to do a 1 month polish. That's okay, but you're going to be polishing while you're also taking your semester courses that fall. I would treat your polish as if you're taking an additional 2-credit class, just because of the work you'll have to put into it. Also, obviously, so follow your instructor's lead, and if your instructor recommends specific problems, obviously do those problems. But also look at the SOA official practice problems. Your instructor might be assigning stuff that is not of the appropriate focus or not of the appropriate intensity for the exam itself. make sure you're comparing to the official problem list. So that's all the preparation. Some advice for exam day itself. So I would recommend you, so I'm not sure if you know this already, but the exam format is a 15-minute period where you can read exam material, you can read the exam content, but you can't write anything down. Now, if you try to read a bunch of multiple choice questions, you can probably read almost all of them in 15 minutes, but you're not going to be able to mentally juggle all those 20 problems and think about what to do for each of them. Instead, I would say read and strategize for 2 or 3 of the written answer problems. Look at those first. Then, take the test mostly backwards, which I did not do the time that I failed. And I should have done it. I feel like I probably would have passed had I done that. So do a bunch of the written answer stuff first. Now, obviously, if you run out of time for the multiple choice, then your exam won't even be great. Give yourself enough time for that. What I would recommend is go through 5 written answer problems first, then look at the multiple choice. Or, if there's time, keep your eye on the clock, obviously. Give yourself at least the 1 hour, 40 minutes budget. 2 hours might be a little safer for multiple choice. But remember, the written answer problems are harder. They take more thought. For me, at least, as the exam goes on and as I'm in that last hour, that's when I start feeling time pressure and can't think straight as easily. The multiple choice questions are routine, simple problems. If you're struggling with those, you're probably not going to pass anyway. And it's a lot easier to do those under a time constraint than figuring out the tricks behind each of the written answer problems. Lastly, you can afford to skip one written answer question plus one difficult part of another question, right? If you're hitting that 30-34 benchmark, assume you're at the low end of my of what I had of about 80%. So minimum 80%. If I think I answered something correctly, then I probably got at least 80% of the points on that. Let's assume that 80% performance to confidence ratio. You have a 56-point second half of the exam. If you skip a 9-point question and a 3-point part of another question, that's 44 points of stuff that you attempted to answer. If you get 80% of that, that's already 35 points and change. Right? So rounds to 35 points. That is enough for that 30-34 benchmark. So you can let one question beat you. Obviously, don't intentionally skip one just for the fun of it, but if you suppose 2 hours and 10 minutes have gone by and you pretty confidently answered 5 written answer questions. Now, go to the multiple choice. You've got an hour and 50 minutes to do an hour and 40 minutes worth of work. You should be fine. You're in the green. And so that's my advice for studying for LTAM. As always, if you like the way I explain things and want to arrange private lessons, click the link in the description below. And until next time, this is Dr. Nighttime wishing you a good night.